Hi, welcome to another installment of the Researcher's Profile series at the OHTN. Today we're interviewing Dr. Anne Burchell. She's a scientist and director of the Ontario Cohort Study. Anne, welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to start by asking you, how did you get here and what is this Ontario Cohort Study? What do you do in it?
Sure. Well, I was hired at the OHTN in 2010 as a scientist, and I'm a trained epidemiologist, so I'm working in that role. And specifically for the OHTN Cohort Study, I'm director. So what that means is that I'm responsible for overseeing the data that is being collected on a cohort of over 6,000 people living with HIV who are getting care in different HIV specialty clinics around the province, making sure the data is flowing in. And the exciting part is working on a number of different analysis projects to really understand the health of people with HIV and encouraging others to get involved to use data from the cohort.
6,000 people, but I understand that you share the responsibility a little bit with community. There's a strong engagement of community in the OCS study. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. In fact, there is a lot of involvement by a number of different stakeholder groups, so it's certainly not something that I do single-handedly. So one of the things that's unique about the OCS as a cohort study compared to many other HIV clinical cohorts in Canada and in other parts of the world is that it has a governance committee made up of at least 50% plus one of people living with HIV. And people on that governance committee are quite involved in the direction that the cohort is going in terms of the research.
Some of your recent findings or very exciting findings, say between 2010 when you took over and now 2014. If you could mention one or two, what would they be?
Sure. What I've carved out in terms of my own research program has very much been looking at co-infection with sexually transmitted infections. So I've built up a number of projects looking at co-infection with syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia in the cohort, and we found fairly high rates, in particular among men who have sex with men who are in the cohort. So we knew that there were rising rates of these STIs in Ontario. It's not unique to Ontario, it's happening in a lot of urban settings. But ours is really the first Canadian cohort that's been able to go in and look at what are the rates of these STIs among people with HIV specifically. So, for example, we found that rates of syphilis infection and diagnosis are about 400 times higher than the general male population. So we're learning what those rates are and thinking about now what we could do to address it. So one of the next projects that's about to get off the ground that we're looking to do in collaboration with the cohort is syphilis screening trial. So we're looking at a way to try and encourage, to find an easy way to integrate syphilis screening with regular medical care for men with HIV. So that's kind of a next step.
Why did you get involved in this field? I know you're an epidemiologist, we know that, but why HIV and STIs?
That's a good question. Well, when I decided, my undergraduate training was in biology. And I was interested in many different aspects of biology and quickly became clear that I was not made for laboratory or bench science, nor field biology out in the woods. But I really like to understand things at a population process.
You broke the pipes or something?
I don't know, just working in the lab, mixing things around. No. But I also I was fascinated by how different organisms interact. So that got me interested in thinking of population processes, how organisms interact. Parasites and infections are a key thing that happen in that one thinks about in ecology, say. So I got quite interested in sexually transmitted infections because if you think about it from the infection's point of view, the virus, the bacteria, this is a very clever way to spread around because, engaging in sexual activity is pretty instinctual and fundamental, and it was always going to be a way that things can pass from host to host. So I got quite interested in it and applied for a program in epidemiology at a number of universities, and got to meet Dr. Liviana Calcevera, who was working at the HIV Social Behavioral and Epidemiological Studies Unit at the University of Toronto. And she was just doing fascinating work, continues to do fascinating work. Yeah. And I had an opportunity to work with her, and there was no looking back after that.
On a lighter note, what do your children say when you say, I'm interested in parasites that are transmitted or bacteria transmitted through sexual intercourse?
Well, I would have that conversation with my 14-year-old, maybe not with my 7-year-old. He just thinks I'm a scientist and wonders why I don't make more potions at home. But definitely with my older child, this is a conversation. I think she finds it interesting. She's kind of starting to see that as an interesting thing for her mom to be studying. Yeah.
So there might be some legacy, but you're also a wonderful teacher. And we know you teach in a number of institutions. So what do your students ask you often? Because you deliver classes on epidemiology in general, of HIV in particular. What do they usually come to you wondering about?
Well, a lot of what I have been teaching recently in the last few years has been around study design elements. So I'll get a lot of, that's a big part of the teaching that I'm teaching people who usually already have had a master's degree in epidemiology, and they're now wanting to get their PhD and become independent investigators. So they have a lot of questions and thoughts about, well, how would I design a study to answer this question? So that we get into some very interesting conversations around how to do that.
And you also tell them, I'm sure, things about their professional future.
Yes, this is obviously first and foremost on the minds of graduate students. I encourage people to be pursuing their dreams. I think being able to be an investigator and working in epidemiology, certainly in HIV research, it's a fascinating field, and there's a lot of work on, fortunately or unfortunately, it remains to be done. I think there's definitely lots of opportunities. Okay. And we need to continue to encourage people to pursue this field, that we need younger minds and ideas to.
And you're saying there are opportunities and funding. I know funding is always
that is a challenge.
A crucial point.
That is definitely a challenge, and things continue to not necessarily be easy. Fortunately, though, I've seen many good examples of people who've been able to get their foot in their door and get connected working on projects that I think there's still opportunity. Yeah. But what one has to have a spirit of perseverance, for sure.
Right, particular researcher in a country that has CIHR, you have to be persevering.
Yes, absolutely.
And what do you usually tell them as your pearl of wisdom?
My pearl of, yes. Whoa, the pressure's on. I think one of the most important lessons that I've had to learn that I would share with others is it's important to have goals, it's important to have plans for where you'd like to be, but I think that one also needs to be very flexible and open-minded to opportunities as they come up. Right. And that, the field is always changing, health issues are always changing, so one doesn't want to become too rigid or narrow in the area they want to go as a researcher, and sometimes opportunities that might be a little bit afield from where you thought you were originally going to go can end up being very rewarding and a great side direction to go. So I think staying open to that is really important to be able to thrive and be successful.
So focus, persevering, but open
Not
to
rigid.
possibility, not rigid.
Not being rigid.
And there is a future. It sounds to me you're saying there is a future for HIV epidemiologists, not only in academia, but in other sectors.
I think so. I think we need to. It's something that a lot of graduate students, myself included, you're getting your degree in academia, and that's what you're seeing as you're being trained. And so you imagine that and many people would. That's where they hope that they will end up. But I think there's also a lot of other opportunities to be doing work in research, and it's a good idea to get exposed to those other places and environments of doing research, because there can be very rewarding projects done there. Certainly a lot of the work we do at the OHTN that's more community-based, that's a real, that provides insights that one doesn't get in a purely academic environment. It can be very rich.
And thanks for joining us for another OHTN Researcher Profile. I hope you're following the different profiles which are in our OHTN YouTube. Fascinating stories, and bring them to life. Thank you very much. My name is Francisco Ibanez-Carrasco. I'm the Director of Education and Training at the OHTN. We'll see you soon.